welcome back. I'm Liz.
I'm Lally.
And hope you enjoyed your day just as much as we have.
We've had a packed afternoon. We've had two very cool panel discussions, one on art in the pandemic and the second on activism in the pandemic, with some really inspiring people involved.
And we had some really popular workshops, sustainable fashion and culture through comedy.
Oh, and you were really involved in the sustainable fashion workshop, weren't you, Liz?
I was, yeah. I learned a lot of tips and tricks on how to upcycle my clothing.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Very knowledgeable at the moment.
Very nice. We were reaching the end of Eye on the Edge, unfortunately. It went by so quickly. We have a nice musical evening for you after this. We also have a giveaway on our social media, and we're happy to announce that the winner is Cian from Galway. So congratulations, Cian, and we hope you enjoy your prize.
So sit back, relax, get some snacks, maybe a cup of tea, and enjoy the show.
Enjoy, and see you in a bit.
Bye.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this session called Underestimated Youth Voices. I'll talk a little bit more about the title in a minute. I'm very excited to be here with Cameron, Meibh and Mikayla. My name is Benjamin. Fundamentally, I'm a storyteller, documentary producer, and so it's a great pleasure and honor to be hosting this session. I'll mostly be kind of steering in one direction or another rather than talking too much, but I wanted to frame it up because I think it's important to frame up why storytelling is so important and impactful. The title was not come up by me, it was come up by this amazing group of young people. I'm not the young one here, but I'll ask them why. But underestimated, I think the biggest danger is not that people underestimate you, but that you underestimate yourself, the power of you as a young person, as any person, to tell stories. So I really hope we can get into that. Anita Roddick, who set up the Body Shop, you may know that shop, it's certainly in the United Kingdom, said, if you think you're too small to have an impact, try going to bed with a mosquito. And anybody who's been to bed with a mosquito will know why that's not a good thing. I think your story is the most powerful story you can tell, and hopefully we'll be hearing a little bit about some of our stories, and hopefully those of you who have questions can send them through on the chat. That would be brilliant. Today I went for a walk, and on the way to a walk I was listening to the radio, and there was a radio program called The Reunion on a station called Radio 4 here I'm broadcasting here from Birmingham in England. And it's where they get people together who go back to a story from many years ago. And this story they were revisiting was around the orphanages in Romania. When Romania opened up in 1989, 1990, they found over 100,000 children that had been dumped in orphanages, one of the worst cases of child neglect in modern history. And one of the people telling their story on that program was a woman called Alexander Smart. And I recognized that name, and she had been an orphan and taken away from one of the most notorious orphanages at the age of 3. Some of this will resonate with Irish experience, I guess. And then at the end of the program, I realized that Alexander was somebody I taught. She'd been on one of my workshops and sat in my class, and I sat there with tears in my eyes because I was so powerfully moved by this story, unforgettable. And that's the best of stories. But it reminded me that we all have one, even when we don't realize when we're sat around together, everybody has a story, and we need to listen and find ways of telling those stories because they're what will change the world. And the final thing to say about this is about who gets to tell the story. And hopefully something, this should frame up what we discuss. I remember 3 of the people who I really admire, young people, Greta Thunberg, Marcus Rashford and Malala, all of whose stories, not their activism, not in a sense them saying this is wrong, but they're saying this is what happened to me, this is my story, this is why it matters, have absolutely changed the world. And just to add to that, at Davos this year, Greta Thunberg took a picture with four activists, 4 environmental activists. And when the picture was published, one of them was cropped out. The woman that was cropped out, her name was Vanessa Nakate, and she was from Uganda. They cropped the black young activist out of the picture the picture that the Ugandan activists where climate change will affect the most. So I think it's also worth reflecting on who gets to tell the story and whose story gets heard, and why that matters when we don't hear from certain people. So that's just a very short way of sort of introducing the session, and hopefully we've got some exciting, important things to talk about that I really care about, and I know these three care about. So Cameron, Meibh, and Mikayla, thank you so much for agreeing to do this session with me. Let me ask you this. I was really struggling for a name. I was like, oh, what are we going to call this? I've got no idea. I was having a really bad week. I was super stressed. And then, pa-ding, underestimated youth voices. And I think I wrote back to you going, perfect, nailed it. So tell me why you chose that title for this session.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's worth saying as well. So there's 3 of us here, but there's 6 other young people on the Eye on the Edge program. And I suppose when we talked about this session and storytelling, and when we got down to why did we get involved with the Eye on the Edge and why was it important, we put up a load of words onto a flip chart paper, kind of trying to get, I suppose, ideas out. And Jacob, one of the other organizers, said to us, think about words that come to mind when you think of yourself. And we started throwing out challenge or power or empowerment or curiosity and things like that. And then the words that I suppose I kept coming back was underestimated or underdog, or I suppose kind of not being taken seriously as a young person. And so we just kind of had that up on the board beside other words as well. And everyone just kind of kept coming back to this words of underestimated. And I think when we thought about our stories and ourselves, that underestimated featured really heavily, both internally, as you said, we underestimate ourselves, but also externally. And when we kind of reflected on, I suppose, taking part in this panel discussion and looking at underestimated, we all kind of looked back at our own stories a little bit. And for me, it has a lot to do, I suppose, with coming out as a non-binary trans person in an Ireland that I still don't think is very ready for accepting gender identity and gender diversity in our country. And when I thought about underestimation, I remember being like when I was 16, I ended up at my first Pride, and I bought in like this really like kind of big tourist shop called Carol's. It's all over Dublin and different places. And I remember going in and buying like a Pride whistle. Nice. And I had that under my pillow every night for the entire duration of the next 2 years till I went to college. But I remember still thinking that by coming out as gay, coming out as trans, that meant that my life was going to be not normal. At 15 and 16, kind of going, will I ever have a family? Will I ever get a job? What will I do? And just kind of you set yourself up for that underestimation the entire time. But I think that the underestimation also pushed me anyways to do, I suppose, more in a sense of, I always describe it as being a very traumatic teenager. But when I went to college, I made myself completely financially independent as much as I could from my parents, because my thinking behind it was, if I came out and they didn't take it very well, at least I had an education. I might not have had them in my life, but I had something else that I could do with that. And I suppose that's a lot. When I look back on it now, and I can kind of maybe laugh a little bit about it and kind of joke about it, but at the time, that's very much where my serious thinking was. It wasn't focusing on anything else. It was focusing on my life was going to turn out this way, so I needed to do X, Y, and Z thing. And I think I underestimated what I could achieve, but that also pushed me then to, I suppose, be able to find things in life and be able to take part in programs like this and show other younger trans and non-binary people that, you can have everything that you want in life and do lots of different things. And that we do underestimate ourselves, but there's also a huge external pressure.
You're just breaking up there, or am I breaking up?
Society to underestimate what trans back now.
Okay.
I think I might have cut out for a second.
Just for a second, I'm going to come to Meibh and Mikayla, and just to say, I think that other people underestimating us is really painful, telling us that we're not good enough or we can't do things, and it happens all the time, and it's generally the older generations. Or I was teaching someone this week, and they'd been told at school that they couldn't read properly, out loud, and it really damaged them later as an adult. So it's really important to recognize that. But you told a story there, because what a story is overcoming something. That's the power in I felt something and then I lay there with my whistle for 2 years. It's very, very touching. Everybody's going to remember that now. And the story is what you overcame and how you took control of your story, of your life. Anyway, let's Meibh, Mikayla, perhaps talk to me a little bit about your own story and this idea of underestimation. Who wants to go? Mikayla.
Yeah. No bother. So myself kind of like that. I suppose for myself, like you said, there's power kind of in like the ordinary acts and in like the everyday life. And you think just because you do something every day, or it's like these small little acts for your own sense of self, like those little wins are the important wins. It's not this like big overarching challenge that you remember. It's those little steps of progress. I find that they're the things that stick out in your head, and you're like, oh, today I did something that I would have never been able to do yesterday. And it's kind of those small little stepping stones. I think like that with like Cameron, and like something as simple as a whistle. And it's right. Like, well, that's concrete. It's an object, and it holds this ideal and this representation of your sense of self. And I suppose for my own story and kind of why like I got involved in the Eye on the Edge is I'm very I suppose community based. I think there's a lot of power in the parish and in the community and in the local. So I grew up in the back and beyond of a little place called Cretty Yard in Ireland. And like growing up, and still to this day, like my parents were my heroes as kids, you know. And I grew up in a very like sporting background. So like I got my first pair of football boots when I was the age of 1, you know, GA football for you, Benjamin, you know. And like I grew up in a community where the football pitch was 2 minutes down the road. Every day of the week I was there for a match, for my own training. My parents were my coaches. You know, we grew up and did all that kind of stuff. I grew up in a boxing club was next door. My aunts and uncles ran the running club, and we had a GAA handball club. And this was all in the middle of nowhere, and everything was like a 5-minute walk, and the football pitch was a 5-minute drive away. And we had all these resources, and it's something like I'm so thankful for, is being immersed into, like, they were the outlets I had, was sporting outlets, you know, and that's where I grew up in. But there was this sense of like family and like community, and everyone had each other's back, you know. And like I said, like I grew up on like the football pitch, and there was like that every day. You would like, most of my childhood memories are from the pitch and stuff like that. And my mum and my dad were like my football coaches. And then like I never realized how much of an impact my parents had on the community. Like growing up, I always like seen them, and they were doing all these like stuff for like other kids and not just me, you know. And then like when I was 10, then my father died. And it was like fascinating, like something like that will stick with me forever is how the community reacted. And it was like how the GAA club reacted. And like it was like there's this like Irish saying, and like it's like it takes a parish to raise a child, and that's what happened, you know. And like that, I was on the under-12s team. My dad was the coach, and when I met a couple of lads on the team, like a year or two ago, and they were still like, I remember the speeches your dad used to give, you know. And it was all about like, we were playing like a practice match. It's under 12s. We're all 10, 11. And they're all like, oh, we're not playing with our hearts, guys. We're not doing, you know, we have to play and be proud of ourselves. He says, I don't mind if we're losing. He goes, but not losing if we're not trying, you know, and this kind of thing. And they would always like these are like 18, 19-year-old boys now. And they would like still re-say his speech, you know. And like, the football club itself, like they did a big fundraiser, like every year, like they would arrive at like Christmas, Easter, and like all these like marked occasions. There would just be random football players coming to our house just to be like, just to give back, you know, and be like, here's Easter eggs, or here's a selection box. And like, that really, really stuck with me. Was like, when I grew up, I was so thankful for what they did, that I wanted to be part of that. You know, like, I'm very passionate about like coaching myself. I'm very passionate about like helping like youth base, because you don't know what's going on in any kid's life, you know, that kind of way. And for me, I suppose I was so thankful as I had all those resources like that in the middle of the sticks, fields upon fields, cows, horses, you name it. And then there was these outlets, you know, and it instilled this sense of community and these teams and this family. And then I suppose other like areas and parishes didn't have these resources. And it's just like this term, oh, that's a bad area, or that's a bad parish, or that's a bad community. And I think there needs to be change. And I think change comes from local, but it also comes from higher up, you know, and it's for getting these resources and to give youth like outlets that aren't necessarily in a negative way and like impact them negatively. So like, if young people don't have something to work on, to focus on, if like, I don't say this lightly, but like there are some places like in Ireland and throughout Europe, and they're just left to rot. And it's like, this is just a bad place. And it's like, we need to look into why this is seen as a bad place. You know,
Mikayla,
like, can they...
I'm just going to slightly interrupt you there, so we don't go too far ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
And I want to bring Meibh into the conversation.
Of course, yeah.
I think just to pick up though, you've taken something deeply painful. I mean, like horrific. The loss of a parent is one of the most brutal. And in your case, someone who was, you know, a dad who was so involved in your life. And there is your story. You're using your story because you've overcome and had to go through that grief and that loss and that mourning. And you understand from that, you're using it to do for a power of good. And because you understand something that other people don't. And that's really the motivation in so many people's lives for making a change. It's very inspiring. And I think we should come back to it. I just want to bring Meibh into the conversation. How is this resonating with yourself, Meibh?
Well, like, whenever we were talking about, you know, our stories, I was thinking, whenever I think of my story, I think of my identity. You know, identity is very important to me. And me and Cameron were actually having a conversation earlier, and we were talking about, like, if someone stopped you in the street and you were asked, you know, rank your identity, like, what is the most important thing to you? And as much as, like, I don't want this to be the first thing that always comes to my mind, it is, and that's that I'm Irish. And I'm from Northern Ireland, so I'm from County Tyrone. But, you know, it's why like, where did this come from? I don't know if it came from, you know, my community, my schools, my parents, family, you know, but yeah, like, above all, I feel like I'm Irish. And, you know, we were talking about, you know, the riots in Belfast and the intergenerational issues that have came and caused, you know, the problems in the riots. Of course, they started with this whole issue of the Bobby Story funeral, and then it kind of went more towards nationality, and, you know, loyalists were kind of feeling as though their nationality was under threat. And then there was talk about Brexit, and there was talk about, you know, a united Ireland, for example. And this ultimately was just like brewing up, and this led to everything that's happening at the minute in Northern Ireland. So I feel really strongly about peace building and conflict resolution and reconciliation. And that's the line of work I want to go into. So yeah, so whenever I think of my story, I think of my nationality. But then we were talking about the riots, and, you know, the media, the politicians, people in general were talking about how, like, why are these young people rioting? Like, they haven't lived through the Troubles. They don't know what it was like. They're bringing this all back. But no one was talking about the fact that, you know, the young people are suffering from the effects of the Troubles. They didn't actually go through it. but all this anger was like brewing up inside them because they've been passed on this hatred and this hurt from, you know, their family members that did actually experience it firsthand. So, you know, I kind of went on a tangent there, but
not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
You're
yes.
talking about the way people look at you now, aren't you, as well?
Yeah.
All three of you will have experienced being placed in a box in some way, and that might be young, it might be non-binary, it might be rural, remote, you know, community. Or Mikayla, I'm just sitting there listening to you, wishing I grew up where you did. That's what I'm taking away. I was like, oh, I missed out. But there are sort of boxes there, and we often have very narrow stories told about that are supposed to represent us. And I'm wondering if that's something that you all felt in one way or the other, and how we might start to break them down with better stories. What do you think?
I think often negative stereotypes about young people, like if you take, I suppose, the narrow view of the three of our stories or parts of our stories, like you'll never hear you know, positive necessarily about some of the stuff that we've gone through. So you see in the media, you know, trans person has done X and it's generally negative, or you've seen, you know, X person has done Y, and it's generally, again, in that negative sense. And we build this up that young people believe around them that the stories that are told about people like them is that they have to experience suffering and hatred and discrimination and loss, and that it should be worn as a badge of honor that you've made it through it. Like the three of us were talking earlier, and we were talking about some of the hardships that we experienced throughout our lives, and some of the things that we sit back now and go, God, like why did we let this continue? Why is this a system that we kind of go through? And kind of like, if we take like being a broke college student, you know, we make a joke out of eating just beans and pasta all the time, but you know, we allow people, and we continue to do that, and we continue to put young people in those positions where they live on poverty lines, and they see people like them being discriminated against or attacked or harassed, and that it's seen as kind of older generations going, well, look, I've suffered, so that means you have to suffer. And we had this conversation once you finished, we finished kind of the briefing before, and it was like young people are often on this edge of breaking away from expectation and tradition, and choosing to break that cycle, but that you kind of, your story is told for you often by older generations, that you end up falling into this trap of following along tradition or following along expectation, or kind of coming out the other side being like, well, now I've survived it, I don't think I can go back and do anything about it, because you're traumatized by that system. But there's also a lot of positives that I don't think get told with our stories, that yes, all three of us have things that have been negative or bad, but there's so many things that have been really positive in our lives, and really positive about the areas and things that we've experienced, the people that we've met, and people that we will continue to meet. And I was talking to the folks earlier about this concept of gender euphoria from a gender perspective. And we talk all the time about trans people and how they have poor rates of mental health, and how they experience gender dysphoria, and all this really important things to discuss, but often framed in a negative way. And I was explaining to them, being like, you know, that top that you put on, that t-shirt that you just look in the mirror and you go, do you know what, I look class in this. Or you catch yourself at a shop window and you're like, do you know what, this outfit is the best outfit I've ever worn. Or
it never happens to me, Cameron. It never happens.
It will happen. It will happen someday.
No, Benjamin, that jumper now, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But like, you know, having those conversations, like there's a really cool video that I was telling the guys about around gender euphoria. And when we flip the conversation about, I suppose in my case, minority communities, and we talk about the positives, we see so much more about how our communities, what our communities have to give, and how much they contribute to society in a way that is completely undervalued and underrated, and how we can show each other that we can see the world in different ways, and maybe not always agree, but that we can all experience life together, without having to focus just on negative stereotypes, or feeding into them, or feeding into I was going to curse there, but I'm not going to curse because we're on live, feeding into rubbish tradition and rubbish expectations.
Nobody can listen to you three and underestimate you, in my opinion, more for them. But how do those, Mikayla and Maibh, how do you feel underestimated? as young people, either in the Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland context. And does that resonate with you, what Cameron was saying about the idea of having to play into traditional roles, perhaps even stronger as women, potentially than men in Ireland? I don't know.
Yeah, I would like say, Benjamin, I think Cameron hit the nail on the head there about tradition. We tend to romanticize this concept of suffering, and we paint it under the brush of tradition. And like change and kind of this concept of recognizing, like, just because I suffered doesn't make it right, you know. And it's like, if you begin that cycle of suffering again, or there's like this point in this decision where you go, I never want anyone to feel what I felt or what I've gone through in a number of different instances for a number of different people. You know, like people go through events, traumatic events that can't like be changed, or that's just what's going to happen in life. But there is others that we can change, you know, and it's like,
Mikayla, what are you talking about here? So what's it, frame this for me? Is this like child abuse, or this like, you know, domestic, what kind of way do you
know, like, to be honest with you, like in a variety of different ways, do you know, like there is like things like in life that like the way that we live it today, like that, like there is it, like I'm going to use it again for an example. There is some instances like death, and it's some are accidents, some, you know, like things like that can't change. But there is other things that like you said, if we bring up like institutions, or we bring up policies, or even in like a less serious context, like from just grassroots up, like through community-based things, there's things that you can change to stop this kind of thing of like, just because we kind of like glorify hardship, you know.
Right.
And it's like, why do we glorify it, you know, that kind of way.
Right. Meibh, does that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep going on about Northern Ireland, but it's the same sort of thing. It's this intergenerational hurt that's being passed down, and this is why, you know, there's still these riots and there's still like these things happening in Northern Ireland. This is being passed on, and like, you know, sometimes it's accidental. You know, this hurt wasn't meant to pass on to like children and family members and like younger people, but sometimes just does. But this is definitely a problem in Northern Ireland. Like I was saying to the ones earlier about the mental health crisis in Northern Ireland, is just ridiculous. Like I went and Googled some facts earlier, but like 12.6% of children and young people in Northern Ireland experience common mood disorders such as anxiety and depression, which is 25% higher than the other UK nations, so like Wales, Scotland and England. You know, and
crisis. That's a crisis.
Yeah, it is a crisis, yeah. You know, and it's how to stop this hurt from continuing on and on and on. And, you know, we were thinking about how this could stop. Like, do we look at history books? Do we try and like rewrite them? Do we like, you know, include peace building concepts within history books? You know, do we pump money into more counselling, you know, things like this here? But it's something that we really need to address in Northern Ireland anyway, is the continuous hurt that's going on, because without doing something about it, it's never going to end.
Do you think we focus on the wrong things then? You think we focus on the symptom, not the root, not the cause? So young people rioting, throwing petrol bombs, etc., not how that young person may be feeling or how they've been brought up to feel about themselves.
Yeah, like as I said earlier, there was people saying, you know, like these young people, they're just out because they're bored, like get them back to school, you know, they're off. And that's just not the case. Like these young people are angry, like they might not know the ins and outs, but they're angry about something.
Right.
And this has been, you know, passed on through the likes of school, their communities where they live. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe education is the best way forward, because it has the best ways to tackle, you know, young people. But, you know, it's going to have to be a conversation very soon about the mental health crisis anyway.
100%, Maeve. And like even on that there, like kind of even just a way, like I would even think about describing it, like with that mental health crisis, I think in Northern Ireland especially, but the likes of the South down here then as well, it's like putting a small plaster on a wound that needs 10 stitches, you know, and it's like how, like that, we're patching up, but barely doing like this kind of patchwork of just, like even in universities here in Ireland, like there's a massive waiting list for counselling. And then on that waiting list, you have 6 sessions. You know, so it's like if you're in immediate danger, that's where the patchwork is. But then it's this concept of, can we not get to the root of the problem before it becomes a problem where it gets this high end situation? You know, and just that's I couldn't even tell you who told me that there, but that it just resonated with me, that kind of image of, yeah, we're just kind of we're just putting patchwork on a gaping wound, and it needs something more, you know, that kind of way.
So we need a Marcus or a Malala or a Greta for mental health in Ireland for young people. We need a young person and more young people to talk about some of this stuff in a story way, because that's how you grab attention, and then really put it to the politicians, really put it to the people with the money, with the policy, to say we need better policy around this. One of my children had some mental health issues, and we went to get help, and this is some years ago, and we went into the building, and it was like something out of the communist era. The building was horrific. It was horrible. You had to go through like locked doors, and the walls were peeling, and I thought, no, not this, not my kids, no thank you. You know, and the people working there were good people, don't get me wrong, and I just thought, wow, we're not really thinking about who these spaces and people and what young people really need, and I wonder why that is.
100%. And like, yeah, and even like you say, they're kind of like, with that space that is available, like you said, it's like this big intimidating building, or it's but it's also kind of like when you say, like, it seems to be a mental health crisis like throughout, like all age gaps, all age groups, you know, but then there's this thing of who can avail of these services and who can avail of the likes of therapy and the likes of counselling. Like on average in Ireland, one session is €70 for counselling in Ireland, you know, and then if you have, there is certain services, there is free services available, and they're volunteer led, they're volunteer based, you know, so it's like our very basis of our health services in this area, it's all on people simply caring. And people, you know, and then there's these services are so overrun, but they're run by volunteers, they're run by people not getting paid. It's literally from not wanting people to have to suffer, you know, and it's like, how can we set up our entire system on this? And like, I completely think they're fantastic groups, fantastic people, but it's like, we cannot put all the responsibility. I think it's an epidemic in itself, to be honest with you, over here in this country, you know, and it's like, how can we put all this responsibility and not, when we do have services and we could have resources, but we just kind of create this almost class system within a mental health way, you know, that kind of way.
I'm being told 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. I'm getting proper messages coming through now saying we have to.
Time's up for flying.
I've obviously met you three once before, you know, today, and I could sit and chat with you for hours. But we need change, don't we? Where will that? We've only got 1 minute left. It's not long enough. How's that going to actual change?
Like, I think for actual change, you know, like we've achieved a lot as a team this weekend to platform young voices, but platforming young voices in a non-pity and non-patronizing way. So when we talk about suffering, and we talk about overcoming challenges, we don't just celebrate kind of, great, you've gotten through that, fantastic. We shouldn't just be celebrating the small statistics of folks that make it through a horrific and really suffering system. We should be going back to that root cause and saying, actually, we need to do something here. But it needs to be more than, I suppose, photo opportunities and often lip service from politicians that, you don't live our lives every day. We have that lived experience, and you need to be willing and open to listen to that and to take that on board. And to be honest, personally, I think we need to stop just printing 150-page strategies of stuff that we're never going to achieve, and actually just start doing, 5 things what we're going to do this year, and this is what we can achieve, instead of 150 pages of, false promises and false pretenses that don't help young people, but tick a box. I don't know about the other two, but that's where I think we should be going.
In the shortest possible time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, again, with young people, I think young people should be involved in decision making. I've always believed that, young people think about the future, whereas these middle-aged politician male men usually think about the now and here. But young people are always thinking about the future, what the future has in store for them, what the future has in store for their children. So, I always have believed that young people should be involved in decision making.
100%. Mikayla, would you like the last word?
I think the guys have absolutely hit the nail on the head, and we just want to say thank you very much, Benjamin, for giving us this opportunity. And like that, we've had this conversation a couple of times, and each time it has gone in a completely different direction. So it's good to always kind of keep talking, and like that, it's always on different topics, different things that need change, and it's just it's nice to see that everyone here, there's a great level of empathy for everyone from all different walks of life. And I'm very honoured and proud to be part of this programme.
Thank you all. Thank you for sharing. I mean that sincerely. And I'm not going to patronise you when I say that when I meet you young people, when I teach them, I feel very positive for the future, extremely positive for the future. And the world is getting better in lots of ways. And nothing about meeting you three has done anything to dampen my enthusiasm that the world is getting better. And so thank you so much. And thank you everybody who tuned in and listened. And also thank you for the people like Nolag who are behind the scenes, who are doing a huge amount of work in setting this festival up and really empowering the young people. It's been very exceptional and to deal with. So and Maria, of course, the MEP. So thank you so much, and have a lovely what's left of the festival, everybody, and take that energy forward. Take that energy forward. Yes?
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.